about awarenesses, things we notice. One thing which very much has struck me in Silent Way classes is that sometimes, as a student, the teacher has spent an awful lot of time working on some distinction in the language I'm learning. I'm thinking actually particularly of learning Japanese. On a distinction, for example, in Japanese you're aware of the words koko, soko and dasoko.
Yes.
And we perhaps spent an hour working on the distinction between the three. And an observer might well have said, well, why don't you just tell the people? Because it's very easy to explain in English what the difference between those three words are.
Right.
Why on earth didn't the teacher just tell the students what it was and save 58 minutes out of an hour? What is the advantage of working in what is apparently such a slow way on some of these things?
Yes, yes. This is obvious, and when you think about it, it's obvious that it wouldn't work in actual fact, because we learn through awarenesses, right? We learn through our awareness, and we learn through awarenesses. And what you need here is an awareness. It's an entirely different thing from a piece of knowledge. A piece of knowledge is just a piece of knowledge, and you're not transformed in any way. If the teacher works with awarenesses, then at a particular moment you're going to say, of course, now I understand. And you're going to really have it in you. You're going to have worked through it. You have all the examples. You have a sense of how it works. Not a knowledge of how it works, but a sense of how it works. You've learned it through experience. Right?
I must say, if I give you the example I've just given you, what struck me was that having gone through that process of spending an hour working on different situations where we were all a bit mystified about what the distinction was. We were using these words, the teacher was insistent that we change the words as some situations changed, and it didn't make any sense to us to have changed the words since the situation was essentially the same, it seemed to us.
Right.
At the end of that process, it seemed to me that I saw the world differently. When I was speaking Japanese, I didn't have to go and retrieve some knowledge about how Japanese worked, but suddenly I was seeing the world in a different way.
Exactly, right. And this is what's important. This is the idea of teaching the spirit of the language. Right. Now, that is what you're talking about, is the spirit of the language. You're also talking about how it should be taught. How do you teach the spirit of the language? What you have to do is teach it in such a way that the person is transformed.
Yes.
Or transform themselves, yes. The language transforms the person into somebody who understands that tiny little portion of Japanese as a Japanese person understands it.
Who sees the world as a Japanese person.
Who sees the world as a Japanese person sees it. Yes. Exactly. When I'm teaching tenses in English, what's very important is French has 7 tenses, which can all be simple and composed, if you like. So that gives us 14 possibilities. In English, there are far fewer possibilities. How do I describe my life if I come to it in a different language? Right. I have to fit what I'm used to describing in 14 tenses in the English system, which is an entirely different system. Yes. How does one do this? We have a past and a present. What do you do about the future? All right, so this kind of thing.
In a certain way, yes.
English deals with it in a certain way, and what you have to do is learn what I have to do is learn to look at my life as an English speaker, or as a French speaker, or as a Japanese speaker, so that I'm actually in the language. I'm not just using the language to manage to buy this or to manage to buy that. I'm using the language, I'm transforming myself into somebody who speaks Japanese.
And Gattegno would claim that the only way to do that is through you yourself having awareness. Is being told propositional knowledge about the language doesn't help you in any way.
Not at all, not at all.
So he then said that the teacher's job is to force awarenesses.
Right.
Now, as soon as he said the word force, at least 50% of the language teaching world raised their arms in horror at the idea
and said, you don't force anybody to do anything.
What did he mean when he was talking about forcing awarenesses?
Forcing awarenesses, there's nothing dangerous about forcing awarenesses. All it means is that you set up a situation where people can't not realize the awareness that they are supposed to be having. Okay. Right? For example, if we know that this is a blue rod, and we know that this is a blue rod, and what is this? Everyone realizes immediately that we're now going to be dealing with the plural.
Not if they don't have plurals, but languages which don't have plurals.
Well, they're going to discover that the language we're dealing with, English or French or whatever, has plurals. And it's not simply, for example, in English, you have one rod and you have one rod, you put them together, and it's not two rod, as it would be in Japanese. It's two rods. Oh my goodness, you have to transform the word. In French, when you're going to write it, it's une réglette. You put the two together and you say deux réglettes. But you have to add an S in the spelling. which is not going to be pronounced. My goodness, why isn't this pronounced? And then you're going to say une réglette bleue, deux réglettes bleues, and you add an S to the bleu and an S to the... You have to transform the adjective and the noun, but neither of these S's will be said. This is forcing awarenesses. Right?
Well, yeah, it is. If you describe it, what you've just done can be described in 30 seconds for the three languages, English, Japanese and French.
Yes.
I think Gattegno's point was, if you present it as situations where the world changes and the language changes, then you have a chance for the student to notice the relationship between how the world has changed and how the language has changed. And it will take 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but they'll have it within them at the end of that process.
Exactly, they will have it within them. And they notice what they notice. Forcing awareness is simply putting them in a position where they will notice what you want them to notice. And that's the teacher's job. The teacher's job is to create situations which will force awarenesses. Right? Okay. Yes. But we're not forcing people to do things that would be unpleasant for them.